Hello and welcome to the World Soccer Talk podcast, your weekly dose of talking about watching soccer on TV, online and apps. Coming up on episode 54, we debate how Major League Soccer TV ratings can improve without promotion relegation. Which final got almost 5 million viewers on TV last week? More hints about Fox's World Cup coverage, our thoughts on the TV coverage of the Major League Soccer Cup final, as well as how the US crashing out of the World Cup qualifying may have a big impact throughout Fox Sports. And that's not just the soccer side of the business. Plus, we have letters from you, the listeners, in our mailbag section. My name is Christopher Harris, a.k.a. The Gaffer, and I'm joined today by Kartik Krishnaiyer. Kartik, are you ready for the holiday festive period in terms of all the football that's in store?
Yeah, I'm having enough of a hard time keeping up with these midweek fixture dates when we've got full 10 fixtures in Premier League and La Liga, not 9 in Bundesliga. So I'm not sure. I will try. Of course, during the festive period, we only have one league to follow. So that's or one top division to follow, and then you can watch a lot of Championship and League One and League Two matches as well. So perhaps I am, but the midweek games have been difficult.
Yeah, it'll be interesting too because like next week we've got League Cup games. So your Manchester City is in the quarterfinal as well as a few other sides, and then there's also the DFB Pokal German Cup. Then you've got Coupe de la Ligue, which is the French Cup, and I think Serie A is playing. I'm not sure if they're playing through the winter break this time, or they're definitely got matches going on for the next week or two. So actually, it's going to be more matches than usual. Plus, on top of that too, there's some FA Cup games. I think this weekend on Fox in the what was it? Probably the fourth round. Or second round, perhaps. And in addition to that, Kartik, of course, there's all the politics going on in US soccer. So it's going to be a very busy festive period. I'm looking forward to it. This is going to be our last episode before the holidays, and we'll come back strong in January. So we definitely want to wish all of our listeners a happy holidays and thank you for listening. But on that note, Kartik, let's dive into what we've been watching this past week. How about you start?
Yeah, so the Stuttgart-Leverkusen game, which was a Friday game on FS1, a familiar voice, which was that of Steve Bauer. So Fox, we know that they have the option to use the international feed, to use the BT Sports feed when BT Sport is broadcasting a game in the UK, or use their own announcers calling matches from the studio in Los Angeles. And in this case, they used the BT Sport feed. So Steve Bauer makes an appearance on FS1, which gives him the John Champion trifecta of NBC, ESPN, and FS1. Remember, he went to went to ESPN for the Euros in 2016 and has been a consistent presence in one form or another on NBC's Premier League coverage since they began covering the league in 2013.
Yeah, that was a pleasant surprise, actually, tuning in to listen to Steve Bauer calling it. And it just shows how versatile he is. I mean, he can do a presenter role, which he's done for NBC Sports in the past, I think covering for Rebecca Lowe. He can do a analyst, as we see oftentimes each week, live from the BBC Sports studios in Manchester, as well as a sideline reporter. We've seen him as also a pitch side presenter. I think one of the days when Arlo wasn't available to do pitch side, and he covers all bases really. So I mean, it's definitely somebody that. Actually, the lead commentator role, I haven't heard of him as much, but it was a pleasant surprise and a great match too on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Bundesliga is becoming very, very interesting because with the exception of Cologne, who's been cut adrift, the other, I think teams 2 through 17 are very competitive with one another. So you've got a situation where Stuttgart now is very, very tough to beat at home. You've got a situation where Werder Bremen can beat anyone on any given day. They've been in the relegation zone. So it's going to be an exciting rest of the Bundesliga season for Fox. Unfortunately, they also have a title race that's already been decided. Last season at this point, it was artificially close between Leipzig and Bayern. In fact, if you remember, Leipzig went went into the winter break with an opportunity to finish to be ahead of Bayern and get that unofficial half-season title that we know the media in Germany likes to talk about, and they lost that game to Bayern right before the winter break. This season, no such race. The title race is already done and dusted.
Yeah, in some ways, though, it does make it more interesting for the clubs below Bayern Munich. I mean, in terms of Dortmund hitting a rough patch, I mean, for a couple of months now, and Schalke doing well, Leverkusen doing better. I mean, so there's definitely some intrigue. For me personally, I've watched more Bundesliga this season than I've ever done in the past before. And for me, it's very accessible in many ways. I mean, I have NBC Sports Gold, so I could always switch to that to watch the Premier League games. But with so many games on FS2 and FS1, it's just an easy to get to, but also enjoyable to watch also too. So it's been fantastic.
Yeah, and I agree, and I've watched more Bundesliga this season probably than any year since. There was one season, I think it was either 06-07 or 07-08. It was 07-08 where I watched the Bundesliga probably as much as I watched the Premier League. At the time, Goal TV was in a lot of homes, and as Goal TV's distribution began to dry up, the Bundesliga became more and more obscure on American television. But that was a good season. That was the year where Luca Toni and Frank Ribery went to Bayern and kind of transformed Bayern's playing style. And you and I visited Goal TV that year. Actually, our first on-site visit with a broadcast entity. So that was exciting, and I think that also kind of stimulated my interest in Bundesliga that year. But definitely watched more of it this season than any time in the last 8 years or 9 years. Saturday morning we had West Ham Chelsea. That was a good game. It was. I suppose I don't know whether to be surprised or not, because it seems like when Chelsea plays teams that are near the bottom of the table, they have more trouble than with the rest of the league. So at times, Chelsea has looked this season like a team that can beat anyone and plays with a confidence and a swagger. This was the type of match where I was screaming out for Diego Costa, because in a match where you're not at the races and you're running out of ideas in the final third, you could count on Costa to scrap, right? To initiate something, whether it was playing mind games with the opposition defense, whether it was just being very physical, or whether it was just popping up and getting a goal. They seem to have less fight in some of these matches without Costa. So that would be my observation of that. Watched Leicester City later in the day. They looked very, very good, as they have under Claude Puel since he took over. Accomplished manager at Lyon. For whatever reason, it didn't work out at Southampton. Although if you think now where Southampton is now, and remember they finished 8th under Puel and they got to a League Cup final, maybe it was just a very short-sighted decision by the Southampton board, or there was something else going on behind the scenes there. But doing wonderfully well with Leicester City. MLS Cup. Let's talk about this, Chris. So within 10 minutes of the broadcast starting at 4:05 p.m. Eastern Time, started a little late because the Indiana-Louisville college basketball game ran about 5 minutes late. Max Bredos, Casey Keller, Ali Moreno, Julie Stewart-Binks, they had already, I think, blown out of the water Fox's coverage from last year. And I know some people are going to say, he just hates Fox, blah, blah, but it was not just the analysis and the savvy of the presenter, in this case being Max Bredos versus Rob Stone last year, but also the music played coming into the match, the graphics, the outtakes, the presentation format in that first 10 minutes of previewing the game. Very polished, very professional, crisp production, not over the top, not loud music, not loud graphics, not hyperbole about the game, about the match. And it was done very well. Then you obviously get to the broadcast with Healy and Twellman, which was outstanding. Twellman was in good form, as he always is, normally is. I mean, everybody has off days, but he was in good form for the title game. The first half was scintillating. I thought, well, okay, it wasn't scintillating. There was one team that was very, very good and one team that was very, very bad. But as we are now trained to do when we watch Barcelona or Manchester City or Bayern or whoever, Chelsea last season, we sometimes just focus on how entertaining that better team was. And Toronto, for you MLS haters out there who talk about how poor the league is and how low the level of the league is and anybody who plays in MLS shouldn't be on the U.S. men's national team, I hope you watched this game. You probably didn't. But the first half, you saw how well a team in MLS can play moving the ball and with their movement off the ball. And secondly, and this is important because we've had all kinds of false starts with the U.S. Between the Klinsmann years and the the brief arena tenure, second arena tenure, trying to play a diamond formation in midfield and not figuring out how to use Michael Bradley in that diamond. Greg Vandy figured it out, and I thought Bradley was brilliant. I think him and Vasquez were the two best players on the pitch. It really made me think again, and I tend to be a Michael Bradley defender, so in fairness, I'll say this, but Chris, it made me think again, all of the piling on by U.S. men's national team fans, a lot of them who don't view things in context, don't watch a lot of football other than the U.S. men's national team, maybe don't understand tactics as well as some other seasoned observers of the sport, how Bradley not having a central midfield partner who could do a lot of running or just play good balls and make the right runs, like Vasquez, how much that held him back when the U.S. tried to play in a diamond in the national team, and also in terms of when the U.S. would just play in a 3-5-2 or 4-4-2 or 4-5-1, how limited the partnerships were with Bradley to where he had to be Patrick Vieira and Zinedine Zidane, not one or the other, right? Or just as an example.
Yes, that's a great point. Or Yaya Toure. You know what I mean? That's
right.
And that's the thing, though, too, for the U.S. men's national team. There's been so many games where Bradley has been disappointing. But you're right, Kartik, that in terms of the tactically, not having somebody to pair up with him well. Beckerman in the past was that person at times. But with Toronto, I thought Toronto. I watched the game too, Kartik.
A lot of this, I should point out, sorry, Chris, to cut you off, but a lot of this is post Beckerman and Jermaine Jones getting to a certain age. A lot of this analysis of Bradley's limitations. So I think it worked when he had Beckerman and Jones playing with him, actually. And this formation worked at times when he had those two guys playing with him. But continue.
Yeah. The game itself, I thought it was really entertaining. I obviously, if I'm a Seattle fan, I was probably very depressed. But I thought it was a really open game, a lot more open than last year's game. Last year's game seemed to be very, very compact and very, very, very kind of played out in midfield. This one was all Toronto. It was very entertaining to watch, a very fluid style of football, creating many, many chances. It could have been easily 4-0, 5-0 at halftime, but really appealing to the eye. And I was really impressed by the quality of play from Toronto. While you watched ESPN, Kartik, I watched Univision Deportes. So I watched the pre-game on Univision Deportes. I thought the build-up was good to the game, being able to kind of pull in the atmosphere. It was really kind of a really good broadcast in the pre-match. They had a pre-match interview with Don Garber on the pitch in Spanish, and then he would answer the questions in English, and they would translate it. Some softball questions, nothing tough, but still good. The commentary was Raul Guzman, Diego Balado, and Marcelo Balboa. And I thought the three of them did a great job in terms of the commentating. And, of course, to watching an MLS Cup final, and when you have Spanish language commentators, it also feels more exciting. It's more of an exciting broadcast. Just one more note on that, Kartik, in terms of the MLS Cup final coverage, is that one of our listeners said that Sky Sports in the UK, which has been showing Major League Soccer games, every weekend throughout the entire season, doing a great job, but they began the coverage of the final in the 15th minute of the game. Because I guess there was other games going on right before it. I think it was La Liga or something. But they joined it 15 minutes into the game, which is a shame in terms of how well they've done with the coverage. It's a shame that they weren't able to find a way to actually show that live. from minute 0 onwards. But I was impressed by Univision's coverage. I think you were impressed by ESPN's coverage, and we'll talk more about the TV ratings a little bit later. But it was very watchable.
Yeah, and I think a key here, though, on the Sky Sports thing is that this is not a normal kickoff time on a Saturday for an MLS game that's broadcast. There are a number of MLS games that are played in Canada, and this was the same case with NASL. It's the same case with USL. Canadian sports audience is more like the British sports audience, where they like daytime kickoffs. So we've had a number of games. TSN, who's the official broadcaster of Major League Soccer in Canada, they're used to kicking games off at 3 or 4 p.m. Eastern and broadcasting, and they have the window set for that. But Sky and ESPN don't. So I think there was a little bit of awkwardness over the time. There's complaints now because the rating wasn't as high as some people had wanted, that it was the wrong window. But we go through this debate every year. What is the right window? We haven't figured it out yet. Or maybe there were other reasons, which we'll get into later in the show. But I would think it was because of the 4 o'clock Eastern time, 9 p.m. British Standard Time kickoff, or beginning of actually it kicked off about 20 minutes later than that. But the awkward kickoff time that allowed the La Liga game to bleed into the MLS Cup.
Yep. So anything else, Kartik, in terms of, I'm sure you watched some other games this weekend. What else have you been watching?
Well, Merseyside derby, Derek Ray and Phil Neville were very good. Phil Neville was not as biased towards Everton as you would fear. Now, he had talked about how this was interesting during the telecast. He talked about at one point how he had always been told it was a friendlier derby. There's a lot that unites Everton and Liverpool supporters, obviously. And we know Everton supporters, just from my own experiences, take any discussion of Hillsborough as seriously and react as angrily as Liverpool supporters. They're from the same town. A lot of Everton supporters know Liverpool supporters who died or were injured that day. So it has had the reputation of being a little bit friendlier of a derby compared to the derbies we have in London, etc. But Phil Neville said, well, when I got here, I was told that, but then it was really intense. It was really nasty. I think part of that, reflecting on that period, was him. Coming from Manchester United with the mentality he had towards Liverpool, I'm serious, because he got sent off in 1 or 2 of those games and initiated fracas and another one that I can recall. So I found that kind of interesting. But I thought he was actually very good. He and Derek Ray.
Just chime in, Kartik. I think yes, definitely friendly in the stadiums, in terms of in the grounds. But on the pitch, though, we've had some really physical, dirty Merseyside derbies, whether it's Duncan Ferguson or whether it's Gerrard going right in with in the first couple of minutes, a really tough tackle. And it's the type of game in the past, say 5 years ago or 10 years ago, that in a typical game there probably would have been like 4 or 5 red cards going in. But usually the referees kind of give a little bit more patient, and will give yellow cards maybe later in the game just to try to ride it out, so to speak. But lately, though, it hasn't been that physical part of it as much as it has in the past. But yeah, right. I'm sure Phil Neville contributed to that in terms of coming from Man United too. I was surprised, though, Kartik, as you were, how unbiased he was, and actually, if anyway, in some ways, almost overcompensating for being a former Everton player, and whether that biased his coverage a little bit in this game. Because the penalty incident, the push from Dejan Lovren, Neville was emphatic. He was like, that should not have been a penalty. And he said, and I wrote it down too, that there was no contact whatsoever. And I'm like, are you watching the same TV screen that I'm watching? Yes, there was contact. Yes, it's debatable about, in terms of the push, how much of a push it was, and also from the perspective of the referee, where he was standing and what he saw. This is debatable too, and I'm sure this is going to upset some of the listeners too, but I thought it was a penalty. It's you can't push a player like that in the penalty box.
You can't put your hands up. You can't put your hands up like that.
Right. But I thought it was interesting with Neville kind of overcompensating for being a former Everton player, and I thought he was actually a little bit biased in a way, in terms of being a little bit more lenient than more biased than what he should have been normally. Yeah,
he's also a defender, so keep that in mind. A quick takeaway from this match. Wayne Rooney scores on that penalty, emphatically books it. I can just speculate about how special it was for him as an Evertonian to score an equalizer at Anfield. I want to relate this story. I think a lot of newer fans of football or people who maybe don't follow it as closely as I do don't know this. When Wayne Rooney scored the penalty, I believe it was against Blackburn in 2011, to give Man United their 19th title and to pass Liverpool all time for the most titles in the top flight in England. Rooney talked about after the game, part of his nervousness standing up, walking up to that penalty wasn't just to win the title for Man United, but as an Evertonian, as a lifelong Everton fan, because Rooney remained an Everton fan, as I think a lot of our listeners know, while he was at Man United. He's a true blue Evertonian. I had a chance to put Liverpool out of the history books. And that was what was in his mind. Yes, the team he's playing for currently, Man United, wins a title, but it was also the Everton perspective. So I can only imagine how special that was for Wayne Rooney, who, in my opinion, has always been given too much flack and too much stick by the British press. I think he's just a legendary player, in my opinion, and I was happy for him, even if the penalty was a little bit dubious. Moving on.
One more thing.
Go ahead.
One more thing, just to mention, just on the topic of this penalty too. I thought it was a really interesting interpretation of the penalty incident by Roberto Martinez. And this is I think in Goal Zone a little bit later in the day, but he said that that penalty. Would have been that would have been called a penalty in Italy or Spain, but usually not in England, which is fascinating, and it's real too in terms of you watch games from La Liga or Serie A, you see calls being made, you're like, that's a bit dubious, or maybe you can see one side or the other. And then usually in the Premier League, you kind of let things slide a little bit. But that was interesting insight in terms of Martinez kind of giving us more of a worldly kind of perspective on this refereeing decision and whether or not it would have been called in other places in Europe. But we've seen that too in terms of the Champions League. The level of refereeing is a little bit different in terms of with the Premier League in terms of what players can get away with. But I thought that was really good analysis by Martinez.
Yeah, and then we had the Manchester derby. Arlo White was better than usual. He let the game breathe a lot. Lee Dixon really on point, really in good form. You mentioned Roberto Martinez, who was an excellent addition, as we assumed he would be, to the NBC studio. I'm a critic of Jose Mourinho, but I've thought at times Robbie Mustoe, who seems to have the same exact opinions of Mourinho I do, has been over the top, but now not maybe over the top, but maybe too much. Over the top. That's the wrong use of language. But I think Mustoe now, it's predictable what he's going to say when there's a big game, big match involving Mourinho, and he tries to park the bus. But it is so important because, no offense to Chelsea supporters, Chelsea is a different club than Manchester United. And what Earl and Mustoe began talking about, and I've talked about with a lot of my friends who are Manchester United supporters, including our former host of the predecessor podcast to this, Nipun Chopra, about the club ethos that even in the 1970s and 1980s, when Manchester United was not winning trophies regularly, but they'd win an occasional FA Cup here and there, right? Under managers like Ron Atkinson, the post-Busby period, pre-Ferguson period, there was still a sort of an obligation for Manchester United to play football, to play open, exciting, attacking football, push the ball wide, go forward, and what has happened under Louis van Gaal, and now especially under Jose Mourinho. And actually, Van Gaal had some of the guys Mourinho had bought. Maybe he would have played differently because his teams his teams at Barcelona and at Bayern Munich were certainly more entertaining than the team he had at Manchester United. What we're seeing is Mourinho almost to troll the rest of us, Chris, and to troll commentators. Because I'm sure in the UK on Sky Sports and on BT, the people are saying the same things Robbie Mustoe and Robbie Earl are saying in the NBC studios. It's almost to troll us now that he sets up like this in every big match, even at home now, and then pops off about it after the match. So I think I've gone from thinking, okay, we know what Musto's going to say. It's getting kind of boring, even though I agree with him, to thinking Robbie Musto can't say that strongly enough or loudly enough. And actually, Musto and Earl continue to have that conversation through the midweek matches. I think the tolerance for Mourinho's behavior, it's not only the parking of the bus, but also his behavior, his press. His behavior in the media has reached a boiling point with a lot of commentators, and they're just fed up with it.
I think in many ways too, though, Kartik, realize how much we're talking about NBC Sports' coverage here, which just goes to show in terms of how on point they are in terms of, soccer in general and what we're watching and what we're thinking and what's going on. Because, Robbie Earle, too, I think on Wednesday was talking about this, too, in terms of the attack, and kind of the Man United fans kind of wanting that, and kind of towards the end of the game against Bournemouth, kind of expecting that. But we're talking about Roberto Martinez, we're talking about Derek Ray, we're talking about the two Robbies. To me, it just shows a great example of just how great of a job NBC Sports is doing.
Yeah, and that they're in tune with this sort of thing.
Yeah.
If Fox Sports had the Premier League rights right now, I don't think the people that they have in their studio would be in tune to, well, maybe Warren Barton a little bit, but the rest would not be in tune to the feelings of Manchester United fans on both sides of the Atlantic who understand the club history and the club ethos, and understand if you're not winning Premier League titles and you're not competing to win in Europe, the obligation is to be entertaining. Mm-hmm. But Robbie Earle said it best when he said there were pockets of that Old Trafford crowd that, despite the animosity, despite the derby, applauded Manchester City off the pitch because they had tried to play football and they had entertained them, whereas Man United had given us what was a dire performance, right? And they did it against Bournemouth midweek. So, I just think it's NBC has upped the game. And there's actually an article today in The Guardian. We're recording this on Thursday, by the way, for our listeners, that you might want to read about how NBC Sports has dialed into the authentic the needs of the American consumer to have an authentic voices covering soccer and covering the Premier League. It's a very, very good article. Focuses largely on Arlo White and Robbie Earle, but just really the whole presentation. And I would encourage our listeners to check it out.
Yeah, in terms of the coverage of this game too, Kartik, I tell you what, this Amazon behind-the-scenes documentary that they're doing about Manchester City this season is going to be fascinating. I'm not a Manchester City fan by any means, but in terms of everything that happened post-match, with water bottles and milk being thrown at Mourinho, the cameras weren't allowed into the changing rooms, the dressing rooms, but I'm sure they must have picked up on some of the incidents that happened in the corridors. And we talked about this a few weeks ago too, that Amazon is doing this documentary that's probably going to be released, I would think, in the summertime, kind of after the season. But I can't wait for this. Especially in terms of how well Manchester City are playing. The other thing, Kartik, in terms of this match, of course, we mentioned Roberto Martinez as the studio analyst. In terms of having him there for halftime and post-match to talk about this game, that really helped in terms of elevate the coverage. I also thought it was interesting, too, in terms of having Roberto Martinez on the show. It actually helps to promote Telemundo's coverage of the World Cup, because Rebecca Lowe would be talking to Martinez, and Roberto would mention something about Belgium, and then Rebecca would say, okay, well, don't forget, you can watch Belgium next summer on Telemundo, in Spanish language, of course, but still it's part of the NBC Sports big family. And then one more thing, too. Lee Dixon is just incredible. There was one part in this match in terms of his analysis, and he I particularly liked the part where he discussed how if there's any blade of grass in front of him, as a player, he was trained, as a young player, to go into that space, because grass is like gold dust, and it moves the possession forward and brings you closer to the opposition goal. And I thought that was really just crystal clear analysis that could benefit anyone from my kids, which I've been sharing that with them in terms of that anecdote. But anyone in this game of football, whether it's someone watching a game or whichever team you support, is just that concept. One I've never heard of, Kartik, but it makes complete sense for anyone that's watched or played this beautiful game.
Yeah, no, it was really, really good. He's just he has these analogies that make a lot of sense when he's able to enunciate himself and has the time to describe it. And this match was perfect for that. So I completely agree. Moving on, watched Monterrey Tigres, both legs. Just fantastic. Two local rivals. Congratulations to Tigres on winning. I think that, again, officiating in Liga MX is a talking point, and was the talking point coming out of these two legs. It always is in the postseason tournaments, Apertura Clausura postseason tournaments in Mexico. And the referees, the Mexican Federation realizes they have to protect the referees because there has been more and more problems with players not showing proper respect to officiating. I mean, I guess that's a problem all over the globe, but especially in Mexico, it's been a big issue.
Yeah, that was so. I watched the second leg, and I was surprised by that. I don't watch a lot of Liga MX, but when I do, I'm always caught by surprise about how physical the game is. I mean, a lot of stop-starts, a lot of fouling, a lot more scrappy than, say, a typical game that I normally watch. And the other thing, in terms of the referee, whenever the referee would make a controversial decision, how the players would completely surround him. You mean 7 or 8 players around him, not pushing, but touching him, getting very close. And I thought that was surprising. That's something I'm not used to seeing to that level, to that extent. But yeah, I agree with you, Kartik. This was a very entertaining game, and it could have easily gone Monterrey's way on this one. There were a couple of questionable refereeing decisions, and of course a missed penalty, but entertaining. And we'll get more into the TV numbers a little bit later in terms of how well this one did. Yeah.
Moving into midweek, obviously, I watched the championship game on Monday on ESPN3, and then on the Cardiff City match, and then on Tuesday, Chelsea Huddersfield. Huddersfield, they just feast or famine. This was the same thing last year in the championship. They either win a match 1-0 or 2-1, or they lose 5-0 or 4-1 or 3-1, like in this match. So it's just something we're used to with them. And then Wednesday, watched Man City Swansea. Now, interestingly, before the match, Neil Ashton was on NBC's pregame hour, and he talked about two things that were significant. One, that the Amanda Staveley buyout of Newcastle is not as close to being completed as has been reported in other publications, in his opinion. And he's usually right about these things. That would be 2 more weeks, 3 more weeks, however many more weeks of Mike Ashley, however many more weeks presumably of losses, and however many more weeks of potentially Rafa thinking he might need to walk if the deal doesn't get done. So Newcastle really in crisis right now, and the end of the Ashley era is going as much of it has, with the team just floundering. The second piece of news was that he believes the Coates family is still very close with Tony Pulis, and potentially Pulis could have the Stoke City job if Sparky is sacked, Sparky being Mark Hughes, after these next 2 matches, with Stoke hovering close to the relegation zone. This was stunning to me, and Ashton seemed very confident in his prediction that might happen, which I think Rebecca Lowe was stunned also. Again, shows the value of all of NBC's programming. In the past, I've said some of NBC's programming, post-game and pre-game shows, were becoming stale. They've really mixed it up recently, and I think maybe Martino taking his leave of absence to run for U.S. Soccer president has forced them to get a little more edgy. But in terms of breaking news or speculating about potential breaking news, that was a masterful segment from Neil Ashton.
Yeah, I agree. And it's one of those things, though, too, with Tony Pulis probably not getting the Wales job. That in terms of opportunities, I mean, going back to Stoke is definitely a possibility. From what I watched this past weekend, Kartik, we talked about most of those games I watched. I did watch Swansea against West Brom, and also the Swansea-Manchester City game. Manchester City right now, to me, they remind me of the movie title, A League of Their Own. I mean, that's how good they are. They're on a different planet. I thought Swansea had a couple of good chances in this game, but really were completely outplayed on their home turf against one of the best teams in the world at this moment. And last but not least, I watched the Flamengo Independiente Copa Sudamericana final, the second leg, on Fox Deportes on Wednesday night. A very emotional end to the game with Independiente winning 3-2 on aggregate. Emotional from the manager, from the players, from the fans. This is, at the Maracanã, playing in front of approximately 100,000 fans, playing in front of the Flamengo fans, and Independiente got the tie in the second leg, and there was enough from the first leg to go all the way through to win this one. But I don't get to watch much Copa Sudamericana, but based on this final, completely overwhelmed, very exciting, and we'll definitely tune in next season for this tournament. A great culmination of a great season. Now, Kartik, let's move on to TV streaming news.
Yeah, some pretty big news this week in the world of soccer media, at least here in the United States. And being a Floridian and being a political person, this is particularly interesting for me. Joe Scarborough will host NBCSN's new series about the Premier League, which is going to debut on Boxing Day, December 26th. After the Boxing Day fixtures, 3 episodes are planned at present, could be more in the future. This was according to Variety magazine. And Scarborough is a big Liverpool fan, so be prepared. Those of you who may not follow him, may not follow politics, and may not know his allegiances. His allegiances are to the Republican Party and to Liverpool, or actually maybe not even to Alabama, Alabama Crimson Tide. Maybe not even to the Republican Party anymore. I think he says he switched his party registration to independent because of Donald Trump. But he's a very engaging presenter. I mean, I was a person who, working in politics, clashed with him. I come from the liberal persuasion. I'm a Democrat here in Florida, but he is engaging intelligent as a host, and I think it's going to be real exciting. And on top of that, Chris, this is this third straight year, I believe, that NBC has debuted something new for Boxing Day, a new series.
Maybe. Usually they've done what? The Premier League Download series?
Yeah. And there was a Premier League I guess it was a download series, but it was one of those club documentaries 2 years ago.
Yeah,
Behind the Badge, correct. And then last season it was the Freestylers. It's called Football or whatever that show was called, which I actually enjoyed a great deal and gave us a lot of behind the scenes at Chelsea and Arsenal beyond just the freestyle footballing. And now this. So again, NBC, we've called on them to freshen it up and add some new things, and they seem to be obliging us. Really looking forward to this, and they keep raising the bar.
On to other news. Fox Sports might have some budget cuts coming up soon as a result of the US crashing out of the World Cup. So according to Sporting News, they say that Fox Sports staffers in Los Angeles are bracing for a wave of possible budget cutbacks due to disappointing NFL advertising sales this season. Plus, with the Team USA eliminated from the 2018 FIFA World Cup in Russia, Fox cannot count on soccer ad dollars next year to get well from an ad standpoint. So in terms of the amount of revenue that they were projecting to generate from having the World Cup and having the Team USA in the World Cup, they probably have had to change those expectations slightly, and that's having an impact, or looks like it's going to have an impact within Fox. It also means that some of the stars on the NFL side, Skip Bayless and others, there's some doubts there too in terms of their contracts. Really, I think at the end of the day, what's happening is that Fox is having to tighten belts within the organization, and a lot of this comes from the World Cup. And so we'll have to wait and see kind of what happens in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very unfortunate for Fox that they're going through this progression, because also FS1 and FS2's ratings are not at the level they had expected to begin with. We have the whole cord cutting phenomena, and then an event that they had a massive outlay for, which was 500 billion. They now the property is worth significantly less in the U.S. market. So tough times for Fox. We had a combined total of 4 million viewers for the Liga MX Apertura final across Univision and Univision Deportes. Two-leg final, obviously, between Tigres and Monterrey that we had talked about before. That's a fantastic number, particularly when you consider there was no Chivas, there was no America, there was no Cruz Azul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to wonder if Major League Soccer is kind of looking at this going, okay, 4.9 million viewers total combined for both of these, the first leg and the second leg of the final. If they're thinking for the future MLS Cup finals, whether to make it a two-leg affair and have 1.1 plus 1.2 perhaps, say, and have it to be 2.3 or 2.4 million, that's something that I wouldn't be surprised if they're considering. But from Liga MX's point of view, it's not as high as the 6 million they got this time last year, and I think that was Chivas against Tigres. But for Tigres and Monterrey, almost 5 million for those two games combined. It's still fantastic numbers. Now, moving on, Fox Sports has revealed a little bit more detail regarding what they'll try to do for the World Cup coverage this summer. And I've got a clip here from executive producer David Neal, who was interviewed at a sports conference, and he went into more detail. And it starts off by asking about the elephant in the room, which is the U.S. not making it into the World Cup and how that impacts their coverage. So let me go ahead and press play on that.
Elephant in the room, I like to call it, which is Team USA disappointing everybody by not making it. How did that change? When that happened, I was like, oh man, you guys are in scramble mode, or so how did what did you guys do to kind of recheck things and kind of redeploy your forces, if you will?
Well, it forced us to reevaluate the entire operating plan. Because it's the first reaction is to simply say, well, it's really only likely that costs us 3 matches, because the United States was not very good, as evidenced by the fact that they didn't qualify. So you play 3 matches in group stage, so unlikely to even expected that they would have advanced into the round of 16. Having said that, it would be naive to say that not having the United States there doesn't impact you at all, so of course it does. The interesting thing is there's been such great interest and I would say concern on the part of FIFA and HBS that this would somehow diminish our interest in covering this event, that they really, particularly at the World Broadcasting meeting last week, went out of their way to point out resources that effectively we've already paid for as part of our rights fee, things that can make us more efficient, can help us to be even more effective storytellers about the 32 teams, because here's my spin. We used to have 1 team. Now we have 32 teams to worry about. So in order to help us tell stories about the teams that will be there, HBS in particular showed us a lot of the resources that they already plan on deploying, and really wanted to make sure that we understood what they were, how facile they are in terms of our being able to use them, made connections for us with other broadcasters. And I have to say that the draw came out in a way that was about as perfect as you could envision given the circumstances with no United States team. Our big marketing push is going to be on the big 3. And I'm reminded with the NBA having been in here just before we walked in, back when I was at NBC and we enjoyed the 6 years of Michael Jordan and the Bulls, what made that a transcendent television property was Michael Jordan. It was the stars, Jordan and the Bulls, but it was Michael Jordan. We still have the 3 best players in the world. We've got Lionel Messi, we've got Cristiano Ronaldo, and we've got Neymar. And the way the draw came out, none of those guys play on the same day. They're spread pretty evenly through the 2 weeks of group stage. So really what our big emphasis in terms of storytelling, production, marketing, everything is on the big 3, to try to get American viewers to the point where they don't want to be in line at Starbucks in the morning and have their friends say, hey, did you see what that Ronaldo guy did last night? And have them not be able to be conversant. We need to do everything we can to make it relevant in terms of pop culture, cover the heck out of it, bring those guys to life, make Messi be more than just a guy, make Ronaldo, Neymar, those guys, bring them to life with, Jen Pransky and our features unit are world class. They'll be able to do that. So.
There you go, Kartik. So there's David Neal from a sports conference this week, and the audio wasn't the greatest, but it is what it is. But Kartik, what's your initial thoughts? He had a lot to say there in a short amount of time.
Yeah, I think it's to me quite interesting that they're in this paradox, right? This catch-22 with the U.S. not qualifying. They have made a significant outlay and a significant commitment to cover FIFA events, but at the same time, now have to compensate in some way for not having the anchor portion of what would be their programming. So it's a balancing act, and you kind of get that from listening to them there.
A few interesting things that jumped out for me was, I think he's mentioned that we started with one team, now we have 32 teams, which of course is in terms of what they were originally planning on doing, which is going to be all USA all the time, focusing on that and playing that up, and then, talking about the other teams, but not so much, and now how that's changed. That was interesting. The other interesting thing to me was them focusing on Neymar, Messi, Ronaldo, which is some great free advertising for beIN Sports with their coverage of having those guys week in, week out, but focusing on those three individuals as a way. And I'm sure in terms of their marketing, advertising, that's what we'll begin to see in the coming months. Some ads featuring those guys, playing them up and going from that angle. The other interesting thing, Kartik, to me was David Neal kind of downplaying the United States' chances in this World Cup and mentioning that they weren't that good anyway, they were a little bit older, and the most that they're expecting was 3 games out of this tournament. I think that's a little bit of a spin there in terms of what they... I mean, US usually makes it into the second round, usually at a minimum, but downplaying what the US could have done and just kind of spinning it to say, okay, well, we're only missing out on 3 games because the US probably would have crashed out in the group stage anyway. But all in all, some thoughts, and it gives us some perspective and some insight into what they're thinking. And I don't blame them going the Messi, Ronaldo, and Neymar route. And hopefully, I don't know, they got a huge job on their hands, and it's going to be a huge challenge to make this work, as we discussed last week. Now, Kartik, let's move on to the next news item.
Yeah, so in the MLS Cup broadcast, MLS used a helicopter cam to rule that Jozy Altidore's goal was onside. And if you want to see it for yourself, it's on YouTube. It's pretty fascinating that that the video replay or VAR has now gotten to that level. Sophisticated, but it didn't create any kind of delay for us. So it worked.
Yeah, so this, for those who missed it, I missed it too, but so Howard Webb, I guess, was interviewed by ESPN, I'm not sure, on the day or afterwards about that incident, and he said that the VAR, the video assistant referee crew, in the, either in the stadium or in the truck, had all the different camera angles. One of the camera angles they were using too was from the helicopter cam that was being used to show overhead shots, and that's the one that they looked at and made the ruling that Jozy was onside or level, and that the goal should have stood. As far as I know, Kartik, that's the first time that a helicopter has been used for a video assistant referee. But more power to them. I mean, if that makes a difference to make the decision more fair or more accurate, go for it. Of course, we can't expect that every single game, but really fascinating from a TV perspective and how that can improve the game of soccer that we love. Now, ESPN has revealed more details about their paid streaming service, which is going to debut in the spring of 2018. It's very likely that Major League Soccer games and the championship will be included in this service. But by the sound of it, there could be some other soccer leagues added too. No confirmation on that yet, but I do have a clip from that same video conference, sports video conference, put on by Sports Video Group, with John Skipper, who's the head of ESPN, and he gives us more perspective of what to expect from this paid service. So let me go ahead and run that clip too. Okay, here it goes.
I don't know if ESPN Plus is about going to where they are. It's about going to where the technology is. And it's pretty clear that the technology of distributing video is going over the top. And that's where we're going with this. We bought in BAMTech the world's greatest video platform service for streaming live events. That's what we wanted. We wanted to be able to take what is our bread and butter, We do 16,000 live events a year on the ESPN networks. So that's core to what we do. We bought the platform BAMTech. We're going to launch a direct-to-consumer over-the-top service sometime this spring. Now, I sometimes get asked, wow, you guys are just sort of getting to the party at launching an over-the-top service. It's not accurate. We launched over a decade ago ESPN3, which was the first network paid for by the traditional distributors that streamed games. Last year we streamed 12,000 games on ESPN3. But let me give you the overall story if I can, and I apologize. It's not uncomplicated. What we're going to do is to launch a new version of the ESPN app this spring. That new version of the ESPN app is going to be the best way to consume the totality of ESPN in the future. It's going to be the way you enjoy ESPN the best. You download the app, you have all of the content which is traditionally on ESPN.com, mobile ESPN, which 102 million people consumed in October, consumed 9 billion minutes. It's a 35% share of all the digital consumption of sports on the internet. So that's going to live in the app. You download that app, all that's for free. It remains. You authenticate your pay television, where the great majority of the best sports in the United States resides. You still need to have that pay television. Download that watch ESPN and watch those games there. We are launching a complimentary product called ESPN Plus, and it is the way to take all the stuff you love about ESPN and add more to it. We will do within the first year, we will have an aggregation of 10,000 new live events on ESPN Plus. That means we will distribute more than 25,000 events next year. It will also have a large collection of video on demand. So you can kind of think of it in two buckets. A bunch more games. A lot of those games will be niche sports. A lot of those games will be for particular passionate sports interest. And then a sort of Netflix-like aggregation of multi-part docuseries, behind the scenes, visit with such and such a college football team.
Okay, so he goes on into more detail, but I'll stop it there. So we have ESPN3 today, and with that, you mean authenticating through whether it's your cable company or your satellite company or some streaming companies, you can access that content. If you're a cord cutter through Sling Orange, you can get all that content. And then ESPN Plus, which the reason I let the interview go a little bit longer is that he does mention that it's going to focus on niche sports. So you're going to have 10,000 games that you have access to. In some ways, it sounds a little bit similar to NBC Sports Gold. That would be an add-on package, an add-on streaming package. We just have to wait and see what's on that. Is that what's currently MLS Live and some of those games, the out-of-town games that on a Saturday that you would subscribe through MLS Live today, that you have to subscribe through ESPN Plus next season? Will they bring in the championship games into that as kind of a niche league? And will they add more TV rights or more rights? So the FA Cup rights, for example, are up for bidding. That could be something that they could acquire and put on ESPN Plus. So that's another paid service, Kartik, that we're probably going to have to shell out some bucks for next season if we want to watch all the sports that we're used to today.
Yeah, unfortunately that's the case. And I would add on to that ESPN had an ability in the early days of ESPN3, it was called ESPN 360 at the time, to acquire rights from various leagues that weren't on American television, and even the digital rights for some leagues that were on American television. So when Skipper implies that there might be more football leagues beyond MLS and the championship added to this, I think you might see leagues like the Portuguese league or the Russian league, or I'm just kind of spitballing here, but the Belgian league, these sorts of leagues end up on this service as well. So it probably will be worthwhile for soccer fans, but be prepared to shell out some more money. Yeah.
And again, we'll have to wait and see. They haven't decided, so they haven't announced yet what's going to be on there. MLS Live, I can almost guarantee, will be on there, and probably MLS Live, which is currently owned by ESPN anyway, will go away, and it'll be ESPN Plus that you have to subscribe to. The question is, what other soccer content will be on there, as well as other sports. I mean, they have cricket, they have other sports too. So we'll have to wait and see. But at least, again, more insight into what to expect. And that's the reason why we brought you these clips from Fox Sports and ESPN to give you a heads up regarding what's coming in the coming months. Now, Kartik, one more news item before we talk about TV ratings.
Yeah, just completed this morning. We're recording this on Thursday. Disney's completed a purchase of 21st Century Fox for $52 billion. In terms of soccer coverage, this includes Fox regional sports networks, including YES, which of course broadcasts Manchester City Television. Fox regional sports networks, a lot of them have MLS games, and they've been showing Champions League games, although that contract obviously expires and goes to Turner next year. It includes FX, which is a big addition to the Disney portfolio. And obviously they've shown Bundesliga games in the past and some Champions League games. Star India, which, by the way, one of the Star India channels was purchased by News Corp just about 3 or 4 years ago from ESPN. So they're getting that channel back and the rest of the Star channels. And 39% of the European pay TV operator Sky. And I should mention the Star India channel that had been purchased from ESPN, from Disney by Fox, was still showing ESPN programming. So there is already an established relationship in the Indian market between between Fox and ESPN and Disney. So they get 39% of the European pay operator Sky. That's the continental operator, not B Sky B, which I think many of our listeners know has been in. There's been a lot of haggling over News Corp and Murdoch's role there, and that is that's what led to us finding out about the phone hacking scandal, among other things.
All right, moving on to TV ratings. Some of the big numbers out this past week, and we'll get more into this in a minute. 1.4 million viewers for the Manchester Derby. That was on NBCSN on Sunday, 11:30 a.m. Eastern kickoff. Out of that, it's actually 1.397 million to be exact. 902,000 of those viewers watched the game on NBCSN. 495,000 on Telemundo. Now, that 495,000 on Telemundo, that's their biggest number all season long for the Premier League on Spanish language television in the United States. And NBCSN, I believe I think it's the highest rated game this season on cable, on almost 1 million now, or just over 900,000. So all in all, 1.4 million. It would have been great if this game was on NBC over the air, but still impressive numbers there for the Premier League and NBCSN.
Yeah. No question about that, and I think we're seeing the numbers begin to recover. I was concerned about the numbers earlier in the season, and now we're seeing an uptick. Maybe it's not where necessarily we thought it would be after year one of NBC's coverage, but it's certainly recovering.
Yeah, and then moving on to the big one, Kartik, and that's the Toronto-Seattle MLS Cup final on ESPN. And it was on ESPN plus a simulcast on Univision Deportes and Unimas. Altogether, for those two, for both the Univision channels combined and the ESPN channel combined, it had 1.143 million, so 1.1 million in all. For Univision, it's about, I think, less than half of what they got last year, so a big blow there. For ESPN, actually, the number was greater than it was a couple of years ago when they last had a MLS Cup final. But all in all, it's disappointing because these numbers, it's not apples to apples by any means, but these numbers this year are 43% less than last year. And we knew that the number was going to be less because last year's final was on over-the-air Fox Network, prime time on a Saturday night. And then this year was at the 4:30 kickoff Eastern time on ESPN, which is still a flagship network, massive network in the US, and then with the Univision networks there too. So the other thing to add to this, Kartik, from my perspective too, is that part of the disappointment was from the overnight ratings. So the overnight ratings came out, I guess it was on what would have been Sunday or Monday when they were actually published. The overnight ratings were strong, and one of the people in the business, Jonathan Tannenwald, I think it was posting on Twitter talking about, okay, based on this overnight rating, my kind of over-under is 1.15 million for the ESPN number. So in a lot of people's minds, they were expecting ESPN to come back to announce once all the official viewing numbers were released, that the viewing number would have been 1.15 and above. And it came in at, the 800,000 or 803,000. So in many ways, kind of the bar had been raised in terms of expectations, and the number that came in ultimately was disappointing. So there was that hurt, and I think that stung. The other thing too, ESPN, once the overnight numbers had come out, ESPN putting out a press release saying how strong the numbers were. To me, I mean, playing Monday morning quarterback, in hindsight, I think in many ways that ESPN would have done better by not publishing those overnight ratings, and probably by Tannenwald not actually publicizing those numbers too, or not making a big deal out of it, because ultimately those numbers that did come in were decent for what it is. And again, it's not an apples-to-apples comparison. What do you think, Kartik?
I don't know. It's not an apples to apples comparison. The Univision number is the only number we have that is apples to apples. I'm at a loss, right? Because also the window was different. It's just not working, right? I'm getting frustrated. I'm getting physically frustrated by this debate, because you have on one side people who feel like MLS cannot do anything wrong, and that those of us who criticize MLS are are Euro snobs, anti-American soccer. But then on the other side, quite frankly, Chris, you have people who will take any piece of data that makes MLS look bad and exaggerate it, and anything that may in some way damage the credibility of MLS and overplay it. I'm just tired of this debate. The window was different. The network was different. Let's compare apples to apples, which is the ratings of an MLS Cup on ESPN to other sporting events on ESPN, the ratings of the MLS Cup when it was on Fox over the air to other primetime sporting events on Fox over the air, like college football, etc. And let's have that conversation, okay? I am so tired of quite frankly, Chris, I mean, we criticize MLS a lot on this show, but I'm tired of the anti-MLS people too. They don't have any objectivity either when it comes, especially to this discussion about television. It's just terrible.
Yeah, I think there's two extremes. I mean, there's the MLS fanboys that will take any number, any positive number, and then just blow it out of proportion in terms of how fantastic this number is, without putting it into context with other numbers. Part of that is the Adidas shirt deal, which was a great number for MLS, but putting that into comparison to other teams or other leagues is very small. On the other side, you have the anti-MLS crowd that will take any negative number and will blow that out of proportion. At least for us in between, I think we're trying to be impartial and we're trying to be objective. To me, I thought the number was good. I thought the number was decent. Yes, the Univision number is disappointing. But again, I still think in terms of ESPN putting up the press release, Tannenwald blowing up the number, or the expectation of what the final number was, making a prediction, and then the actual final number coming in being below that, below the expectations, it felt like a big kind of just a really disappointing number. So I think it's actually it's promising. It's not as bad as people make it out to be. Yes, it could be better, but I mean there was also the Army-Navy game on. But yeah, it is what it is. It's decent, and I guess we'll move on.
Yeah. I think the Army-Navy thing is so interesting because even people who follow college football I think are stunned every year when the number comes out from that game. They're just people who that's a completely different audience than your typical sporting audience or even your typical college football audience. And the fact is this game was going head-to-head with it. I mean, there was no part of the game of the MLS Cup match that did not overlap with the Army-Navy game.
All right, let's move on. We'll have the rest of the TV ratings numbers published this weekend on worldsoccertalk.com. Listener Mailbag, first one is from Josh Dens, and he sent this in through email. I'll be interested to get your feedback on this one, Kartik, by the way. He says, "Hi, guys. Huge fan of the pod. Keep up the good work. Big Toronto FC fan from Buffalo, New York. But I'm beyond upset that ESPN had no real pre-game coverage before MLS Cup. They haven't marketed it well in the days leading up to the match, either, in my opinion. Only 2.5 hours of time allocated for the match. Total is horrible to me. I would understand this mediocrity from Fox, but certainly not ESPN. Would love to get your opinion on how soccer in America can possibly grow when the Cup final isn't even marketed remotely well, and why there wasn't even a pre-game show.
Yeah, this is, again, Chris, about the windows. And finding the time in the programming schedule. I mean, I was initially very excited about the broadcast window as I thought there was going to be, and then it turned out, in fact, was under a misconception when we interviewed Amy Rosenfeld last week about that broadcast window, and it's contracted, so it's not really a pregame show. We were speculating on Twitter before the match about Greg Vandy going to a diamond, right? And I talked about that earlier in the show. And I think had you had a proper pregame show, you would have had a lot of time to dissect that formation change and its potential impact on the match. And like I said, it was brilliant. I thought Toronto was brilliant. But yeah, I agree.
But Kartik, so I missed the pregame on ESPN. I was watching the Univision one. So is he correct that there was no pregame show, or was there a pregame show? Or was it just that it was truncated? There was,
but it was about 15 minutes. I mean, it was already cut in a little bit because the college basketball game ran over its allotted time, which always happens, right? College basketball on ESPN, this has been a frustration of mine for 20 years. They always schedule these games in 2-hour windows. And they never, they hardly, and they don't go 2.5. Right, but they'll go 2 hours and 5 minutes. So what happens is when they have back-to-back college basketball games, as they did prior to MLS Cup, the tip-off for the second game will be delayed by 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then that will split into the next program, which in this case was MLS Cup. So I would say maybe 4:07, 4:08 they came on the air Eastern time. And then the kickoff was probably before 4:30. So 15 minutes, maybe 20. I don't think it was a full 20. I think it was like 15 minutes. Right. Yeah, with commercials.
Yeah. All right, moving on. The Soccer Heretic sent us a tweet, and he says, I always chime in when I have criticism, but I just wanted to say that your analysis of Kathy Carter's candidacy and interviews was spot on. Seems like a clear case of meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Also think it is worth pointing out that the media group's journalists who have strong ties to Major League Soccer began attacking the reform candidates for typos and minor grammatical errors, for even suggesting that there is a bias in the coverage, which seems apparent. Within 24 hours of Carter's announcement she was entering the race, Grant Wall had a full segment on her leading into UEFA Champions League coverage on Fox Sports and ESPN. And ESPN had what amounted to a profile piece with softball questions. None of the other candidates have received such front and center attention. When the journalists and media departments were interrogated by fans on Twitter seeking reform, they countered with what they had, that they had other candidates on podcasts. I'm not going to hammer podcasts because obviously I'm an avid regular listener of many, but there is no way you can convince me that these podcasts, all combined, have even half the reach as any of the segments aired by the MLS/some partner networks, namely, in this case, ESPN and Fox. Some big words there, too, from Soccer Heretic. Kartik, do you agree?
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I think the Kathy Carter candidacy is very troubling for a lot of people. We'd love to have her on the show and ask her some of these questions. The appearance is not good, and even folks that are kind of middle of the road or even in the MLS camp are a little concerned about it, quite honestly.
And then the last message, this one's from Facebook, and this is from Raymond Orozco. He says, I really liked your interview with a person from ESPN, with ESPN having a relationship with Univision. Do you think that you might see Liga MX games on ESPN? I really like the diversity that ESPN puts on their soccer broadcasts. It really is a reflection of the American soccer fans. So two things here. One is that ESPN in the past had the rights to Liga MX games. Used to be on, I think, Friday nights or Thursday or Friday nights. Used to have Dan Thomas commentating some of those games in English. That's a number of years ago now. I thought that those were a great idea, but for whatever reasons, maybe Univision came in and said, okay, we'll acquire those rights, those English language rights, for a lot more than what ESPN is getting. Plus, on the other hand, it might have been ahead of its time in terms of ESPN putting these games on a few years ago, while if they tried it now, it might be a little bit more receptive to getting better ratings. And then the second thing, too, I think where Raymond says about ESPN having a great diversity on their shows and on their coverage, I completely agree. And that's something that Fox is desperately lacking. We'll have to wait and see about the World Cup if they try to change that with having minorities or females or others on these sets. But I think ESPN's doing a great job there. And any additional thoughts on that one, Kartik?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think ESPN is doing a great job there. And they, as we talked about earlier in the week, or on the website, and check out the article, they actually had more viewers for their post-World Cup draw show than Fox did, the rights holder.
Yeah, double in fact. And if you get a chance, listeners, check that out. Kartik's got a great story on the homepage of worldsoccertalk.com where he asks the question, will people be tuning in to ESPN for their World Cup coverage instead of Fox, especially kind of the studio coverage post-match? Because regarding their talent that they have, there's some, at this point in time, much better talent with a lot better analysis. So if you have any questions for us or feedback or anything you want to comment on, let us know. We'd be more than happy to read those out on air. You can reach us through email, which is web@worldsoccertalk.com. You can tweet us at WSoccerTalk or hit us up on Facebook at facebook.com/WorldSoccerTalk, and you can message us there. Now, Kartik, moving on to our feature topic of the week, and that is a question. It's a discussion of what leagues can do to become more relevant in the United States, particularly Major League Soccer, and whether or not Major League Soccer TV ratings, as we've discussed in this show and many other shows in the past, whether or not they could improve with or without promotion relegation. What are your thoughts?
It's difficult. I don't know how they improve without pro-rel or some more context to the games.
Yeah, it's. To me, it's one of those things that you look at the current state of affairs and you look at Major League Soccer without promotion relegation. Are those ratings growing, or are they stagnating, or are they dropping? And it depends what you look at. If you look at ESPN numbers through the regular season were down slightly. For the playoffs, they were up. For the final, again, compared to 2015, they were up a little bit. So they're doing okay. But if you look at the entire season as a whole, to me, Major League Soccer, from the TV ratings perspective, is plateauing, if not dropping slightly. If you look at the numbers, putting more games on Big Fox, putting more games on Big Univision over the air, that's going to boost those numbers and artificially inflate those numbers too, so that at the end of the year there might be a slight increase of maybe 1% or maybe 2%. But that's in isolation. That's just looking at Major League Soccer as a whole. But when you compare that to Liga MX, when you compare that to the Premier League, to me, Major League Soccer should be getting much bigger ratings than a lot of other leagues. And that's not happening. And they need to be more competitive. They have more promotion than any other league in the United States. So, you see the Premier League coverage on NBCSN. But for the Major League Soccer, you've got Fox, you've got Univision, you've got ESPN promoting it heavily. And actually going back to the question that in a listener mailbag where Josh mentioned that he was disappointed with the lack of advertising for the MLS Cup final. I would say it's the complete opposite, if anything. If ESPN went way out of the way to really promote this game. And you have three major networks in the United States, the three biggest sports networks in the United States, pushing Major League Soccer, week in, week out, even during Champions League games, even during Bundesliga games, at any opportunity. And they've been doing this now for a few years. So the expectations are that why it should be much greater in regards to Major League Soccer TV ratings. Like, why aren't they closing the gap with the Premier League? Why? And to me, Kartik, I have to go back to promotion relegation, and I think that's the reason that's limiting MLS's growth on the TV rating side. Is by instituting that, if you instituted promotion relegation, automatically it would make the entire season more interesting. Because most listeners, myself included, I'll tune into Major League Soccer for the opening weekends and maybe the second week. By the third week, I've lost interest, and I'll tune back in unless I come across it by chance. But I'll come back to Major League Soccer usually at the end of July or beginning of August, where it's the race for the playoffs to see who qualifies. And with this 2017 season, we saw that more than 50% of the teams qualify for the playoffs anyway. So, and then you got the playoffs in September, October. They're up against, college football and NFL, and then you've got the final that's played, in the middle of December. Weeks and weeks and weeks after the actual playoffs have even started. So to me, if you did institute promotion relegation, it's more likely that people would tune in to watch Major League Soccer games from March all the way through till August. And that's the big gap that Major League Soccer is missing out on. Why bother watching? What's the incentive to watch Major League Soccer games when most of those teams are going to qualify for the playoffs anyway? And there's no threat of relegation. So if you're watching a game between two teams that are probably not going to make it into the playoffs, what's the point of watching that game? From a TV viewing perspective, when you can tune into any league around the world and see promotion relegation, see relegation battles that take on huge importance. That game is, in terms of one goal, can make such a massive difference. In Major League Soccer, if you finish bottom of the Major League Soccer table, like LA Galaxy did this season, what's the consequence? Nothing. Nothing changes. So, Kartik, do you agree or do you disagree? What's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I don't know how you change the content, how you change the relevance, because the season has to be the length it is for the players who play in Major League Soccer, who are also playing internationally, to continue to develop, to play at a high level, to get enough games, get enough reps in. Have training for a long enough period of the season as mandated by the collective bargaining agreement to be successful. And so if you shorten the season or you do something funky with the tournaments, I think that you have to renegotiate the CBA. It is a really complicated thing. My solution has always been to shift the calendar, because I think that's just good for the American player. That's good for player development. That's good for lining up transfer windows. I think that's good for initiating promotion and relegation, because you can't have mismatched transfer windows and have pro-rel and then expect the team that gets relegated or newly promoted team to be able to compete, right? If the windows aren't aligned. So all of this is a factor, but we can critique the MLS regular season and lack of relevance all day long. The problem is there are other factors in this, and I don't have a solution. I think promotion and relegation is the most logical solution. If pro-rel is taken off the table, I don't know how we do it, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. First thing you have to do is change the calendar, and once the change of the calendar is made, that will align things better to make additional changes. But Kartik, I look back to this past MLS Cup season, or the MLS season, and I really think that imagine if there was promotion relegation. Imagine how many more people would be tuning in to watch Major League Soccer games on a Saturday night or on a Sunday afternoon. Rather than tuning those out. There's most of the soccer fans in the United States are really not watching Major League Soccer unless it's your team, unless you're an Orlando City supporter and it's an away game and you want to watch your team play. But outside of that, there's very little interest. Why is there very little interest? Because there's very little relevance in these games. What does it matter to watch, whoever is playing Real Salt Lake against LA Galaxy if it has no meaning to the league? So to me, Kartik, I think you really have to look at that. And I think Major League Soccer really, unless they want the ratings to be the way that they always are and they're happy with that, and you really, I think, have to institute promotion relegation. Now, to me, the big question is, okay, how do you institute that? And that's not an easy solution either. To me, my idea is to have used to happen in England, where they used to have you'd have to apply for re-election. So if you're finished at the bottom of what is now League Two, and what was previously the fourth division. If you finished last in that league, that bottom league, the professional league, you would have to apply for re-election, which meant that you had to apply to, I guess at the time, the FA to stay in that league. And meanwhile, in the non-league conference, the team that finished top would try to get promoted to that league. But having re-election, that looks at everything from is that club financially secure to stay up in that league? Number two, I mean, in terms of stadium, in terms of everything, in terms of what's happening in that ground, are they? I mean, is their stadium okay to be able to continue playing in that league? Or looking at that team from the conference, from the non-league division, is the team that finishes top? I mean, financially, are they secure? Doing the due diligence to see, okay, if they moved up, would that be beneficial? And also, is their stadium ready? And the same thing happens with D2 in the United States. Is because you look at, say, the San Francisco Deltas and how they won the NASL season at the end. Financially, are they secure enough to move up to Major League Soccer? From the stadium perspective, would they have been okay to move up? And in both those areas, I think they would have failed those tests, and they would not have been able to actually get promoted to Major League Soccer. Meanwhile, LA Galaxy probably would have stayed in that division. So that's one idea, to make a way to have the gap between promotion and relegation from D2 to D1, is have some type of process in between where there's decision makers, and it's a fair and balanced decision-making process to determine whether or not the club in the lower league is able to move up and to be to sustain themselves, and if they can, then they can move up, and the team that finishes bottom of D1 can move down. Whether or not that'll happen, Kartik, we'll have to wait and see. This USSF presidential campaign probably is going to have a big impact on that, or a big say on that. But those are my thoughts, and I think there's a way to make this happen, and I think there's a way to make Major League Soccer TV ratings improve with promotion and relegation.
Yeah, I agree with promotion and relegation. There is, again, I think, and you and I disagree on this. We had this discussion, 2.5 months ago on the show. I believe soccer is still a niche sport in this country. I think the ratings very much play that out. It's difficult. It's like pulling teeth even to get a Premier League game over 1 million viewers. It's especially difficult with Major League Soccer. So within that niche, promotion and relegation does give you the maximum potential that you have now. And actually, if you have promotion and relegation in the U.S.-based league, you might attract some new general sports fans to the product. Major League Soccer's problem, though, overall has been their contradictory, kind of back and forth. And Don Garber contradicts himself all the time. I mean, his interview with Taylor Twellman contradicted in some points the interview he'd given, the last television interview I'd seen him give. So, Taylor Twellman interview that aired at halftime of the MLS Cup I'm referring to. But I think that there is this issue where MLS is caught between two worlds. At one hand, they want to be as genuine to the world of football as they can be. That's why their playoffs run so long, because they want to do two legs. They want to have the away goals rule and all of that stuff. At the same time, they try and appeal to American sports fans with some of the things they do, with the way they market the sport. So I think from a competitive standpoint, competition standpoint, they've very much been trying to Europeanize or globalize the way they play the game, and they feel like maybe they can appeal to Premier League fans and Bundesliga fans and Liga MX fans that way. While the way they market the sport is like the NFL or the NBA or the Major League Baseball. And being caught in between these two worlds, I think they're satisfying neither base, and that reflects in the television ratings. Maybe they go hard in on one or the other. Now, if they go in hard in on the American sports fan, they still may have trouble because that then links you directly still, as they've linked in their marketing, to the U.S. men's national team, and that right now is not that's not the identification you want at this specific point in time. And based on their coaching hires and increased foreign players in the league, it's probably wise to go the other way. Now, if you're going to maximize the other way, you need to have pro-rel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, going back to what you said about, and we had a really heated debate, if you go back several podcasts, between whether soccer is a niche sport or not. I still say it's not a niche sport, because you look at even this past weekend, you got 5 million viewers that tuned in for the Liga MX final. You had, 1.4 million for the Manchester Derby. You had 1.1 million for the MLS Cup final. And then you had other big numbers too. But with soccer, there's so many matches on, there's so many different leagues, there's so many different broadcasts. If you combined all those numbers into one, or into half of that, or a quarter of that, you would see how big the sport is in the United States. And there's a ton of people that watch it. It's not like NFL where there's X number of games on a Sunday. Imagine trying to fit in all the soccer games on a Sunday. You couldn't do it. There's just too much going on. So I still think that soccer is not a niche sport in this country. What is a niche sport in this country is Major League Soccer. And that is the biggest concern. Major League Soccer has gone down the NFL model. And like you said too, Kartik, they're kind of caught in between, where they want to appeal to the soccer fan, but they also want to appeal to kind of the casual sports fan. And I don't think the casual sports fan is that interested. The diehard, not even the diehard, just the soccer fan in the United States could be interested in Major League Soccer, but they're not interested in it right now, with it having no promotion relegation, because what's the relevance? Now, we can go on and on about this debate, Kartik, but listeners too, if you do have any feedback, if you agree with us, disagree with us, let us know. We'd love to read out those comments on air on the next podcast. And again, you can hit us up through Twitter, Facebook, or email. Now, Kartik, this is our last show before the holidays. We'll be back strong in the beginning of January 2018 with more episodes coming. But in the meantime, where can listeners find you on the internet if you want to find out your latest interviews or latest articles or your feedback?
Find me at KKFLA737 on Twitter, and I'm getting beat up by both sides, on Twitter constantly, the pro and anti-MLS side. I mean, it's crazy. I think I get the sense that so many of these people on Twitter don't actually watch football, because during football matches is when they're engaging in this, yet they all pass themselves off as experts on the sport. There I go. I've offended half of you out there, but KKFLA737 on Twitter.
Okay, well, thanks for listening. You can get a new episode of the World Soccer Talk podcast every Thursday. Every episode is released on SoundCloud, YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn, Audio Boom, and WorldSoccerTalk.com. And if you like the show, share it with your friends on social media. And we'd love to get a review from you on iTunes, whether you like the podcast or not, but definitely the more feedback, the better. And Kartik, over this holiday period, this festive period, what should they do?
Enjoy your football.
Thank you.